Hi, we're talking about mitochondria in this video. Here's how you spell mitochondrion. Usually that's actually the singular. The plural is mitochondria, which is what people usually call them. And they are these red-looking organelles. As you can see, there's 4 of them around in this cell. They're fairly large organelles, and you can distinguish them from other organelles in that they have these sort of inner wrappings that go inside. There's two different membranes in a mitochondrion, and they usually will have these folds. Here's what they look like in an electron microscope, and again you can see these folds that go through the inside of the mitochondria. In a cell, the mitochondria's main function is that it is the organelle that allows the cell to sort of create a usable sort of energy. It's not creating energy from nothing, because that's impossible, but it creates energy from a molecule that is the energy storage molecule in the cell. So it creates energy from glucose molecules. Glucose is that energy storage molecule. And here's what glucose looks like. It's a ring-shaped sugar. And its chemical formula, which is something you should know, is C6H12O6. If you wanted to, you could go count these all, but you can, you don't have to, I'm telling you, believe me. So again, mitochondria is the organelle that lets that glucose get broken down and turned into a usable sort of energy for the cell. And the way it does that is by reacting the glucose, here it is again, with oxygen in the cell. So the glucose oxygen react, and they make CO2 and water vapor. And in fact, you all are doing this right now. So take a breath, everybody. When you breathed in, you were breathing in, amongst other things, oxygen. And then that oxygen was combining with glucose in your mitochondria inside your cells, and it was forming CO2 and water vapor. And you'll notice it says many ATP. So the deal with ATP, it's another energy molecule in the cell. So you might wonder, what's the difference between glucose and ATP? So here it is. Glucose is analogous to money in a bank. So if you have like stocks in a bank or CDs or whatever, some sort of investment in a bank, you can't immediately access this. You have to go to the bank and take out the money and sort of cash in your stocks. And then when the stocks are cashed out in the bank, they'll give you cash, which you can then use to spend on things. Glucose is like that stock in the bank that you can't immediately use. Instead, it has to get turned into this ATP, which is an energy, sort of another molecule that stores energy, but it stores it in a form that's much more readily accessible to the cell. One other thing that's important to mention about this reaction is that this reaction is an exothermic reaction. It's releasing energy, so because the glucose has a lot of energy in its chemical bonds. So as the glucose gets broken down with oxygen and making these things, lots of energy is released, thus exothermic. It's interesting, not all cells have the same number of mitochondria. So if we look at something like a muscle cell, muscles require lots of energy, and therefore you would expect them to have lots of mitochondria. And in fact, these blue things that I'm labeling in blue, each of these things throughout these cells are mitochondria. And the muscle cells more or less they more or less look like this, one of these packets in here. So each of these packets, as you can tell, has a bunch of mitochondria on each side of it, which would let it break down a lot of glucose into ATP and thus work. Here's another view. Again, here's the blue mitochondria, and you can tell that they're surrounding these muscle fibers on each side. Other cells will have way less mitochondria in them. So a cell that's like a bone cell that doesn't need to be working as much will have way fewer mitochondria within it.